This privilege has come because Center for Financial Accountability and a host of other organizations have come together in engaging with the pandemic. The way it is being handled is itself another pandemic which is being created. And we worry about the consequences this has on the majority of the population, which by and large, the government is not seemingly worried about if we carefully analyze or generally look at some of the plans that it has initiated. Particularly the plan that the Prime Minister has announced a couple of days ago, and the details of which, when they are clarified, we find that there's less and less for most people. So it's in this context that we felt that this is time when people have to take control of their lives, their livelihoods, and their country. So several organizations got together, movements got together. The details are on the Center for Financial Accountability website. And we felt that this is a critical time for us to reimagine the future. Because the future is not going to be the same as we had expected it to be, say, 6 months ago. So how do we engage with this? So this was also an opportunity we felt that we can construct a people's agenda for what is being increasingly called the post-COVID economy. So it's in this context that we have 4 stalwarts to help us understand what we are going through and what kind of economy we must construct, which will be humane, which will be responsible to everyone, which will be inclusive, and most critically, we must learn the biggest lesson of the pandemic is that we can't take nature for granted. It can paralyze everything that we have built over centuries and decades, simply because we have not just been careless or callous, but deliberately extractive and destructive of this planet's limits. So it's in this context that we have Dr. Thomas Issac, who is the Finance Minister of Kerala. We all know how he has led the state along with Chief Minister Pinarayi Vijayan in ensuring that Kerala has shown that if things are done well in a timely manner and with humanism central to any governance intervention, not only can we overcome the pandemic, but we can also ensure that the structures of governance can be built even stronger. So he has diverse experience from his long engagement with people's movements, with people-based planning. He was part of the People's Plan campaign in the Kerala State Planning Board. And he brings all of this experience when he is now in power as the Finance Minister of Kerala. We also have Dr. Vandana Shiva, Aruna Roy, and Professor Prabhat Patnaik. Because we have a constraint of time as much as the Finance Minister has to attend other important matters, I request him to speak first, and I will introduce the other speakers a little later so that we can get as much as we can of your precious time, sir. We don't want to also make, we also want to ensure that other important matters don't get affected by our, demand on your time. So if you don't mind me asking you, I read, your note that your article you had prepared in the Indian Express.
Oh.
And it's an article, if somebody reads, it shows the type of care that you have taken in looking at the nuances and the details and helping the Chief Minister to construct an idea which is shared so well and so meticulously with the public at large. It is almost like you listened to everyone's point of view and constructed this method. And you have argued that at a time when the center should actually support the states in bringing resources to the people, the center has severely constrained you as Finance Minister, that it is constricting an economy when the state should be spending more on people. So may I ask you, what would you have done if you are the finance minister of India? How would you have shaped the central governments, and not just the central, but the overall response in financial terms, so that our economy would not suffer as much as it is now suffering, and people would have not suffered as it's been brutal. It's not just the fact that there has been a lockdown, which probably was necessary, but the way in which it has been done. That the sense of humanism seems to be lost. And you seem to have spoken about humanism through your work more than your writings. So may I ask you to speak, say, for about 20 minutes, which then will help us to get a few questions before you have to leave again.
Thank you. When you referred to my article, I thought, written a piece for EPW, me and the health secretary. So I thought it was, so I was wondering how you came to read that. Okay.
No, this is the Indian Express one you wrote on 17th of April.
But let me make my opening statement. It's too early to discuss about post-pandemic times. We have got to learn to live with this virus at least for the next 1 year. That much is certain. And that's a pretty long time. And I think this webinar and other webinars like this, etc., is very important, because currently there is no other narrative other than what the central government does. That's what people keep on hearing. And therefore it is important to bring together an alternative statement which large sections of people only share as to be what is to be done now. How do you address this challenge of the coronavirus? Now, definitely, as I go along, I would be responding to the question that you raised regarding what the central government should do. Now, once we accept that virus is going to be here for a year, then that means this will continue to spread. Okay, we cannot just stop it that way. It will continue to spread. And you cannot take the attitude of Trump that, okay, few millions may die, but our economy will function. Kind of calculations generals do in battles and war. What percentage will die? Very cool. No, we cannot accept that. Therefore, let us put one limit to the spread of disease, within which the disease has to be contained. We should never go above what can be accommodated in the health system. Once we cross that, then it is panic. Then we have to choose between who should be allowed to die and not to die. Therefore, a humane way of dealing with it would be, economy has to be open and so on, but it has to be contained within certain limits. In Kerala, we have put the limit much lower. Say our ventilator number, ICU bed would be something like 12, 13,000, but we are not going to permit it to go beyond, say, 2,000 or 3,000 infected. Before we'll clamp down. So, Kerala has been able to contain it at a very low level of morbidity, primarily because, one, early detection, we are prepared. Therefore, say in Kerala, if you are infected, you will be identified on an average in 2.5 days that you are treated. In India, the average, the numbers I hear, is something about 6 days. Okay, this is the beginning of the difference. And second, okay, now you have infected, you have disease. How many people do you transfer it? The R naught number. Now there is not very, very rigorous calculation, but definitely if R naught is above unity, then it's exponential growth. If it is below unity at very low level, well, then you can flatten the curve. Kerala, it is something calculations, so it is a 0.4. okay, there may be some people who have been infected, who have not been identified, but definitely much below 1. While in India and world at large, it's something between 2 and 3. Now, this has been made possible because of very intense testing, and once identified, you are traced, all your contacts are traced, and they are in turn tested positive, you're isolated, and then support is given. Now, this is the method. So this has been done very effectively. This is something that is just not being done in most parts of India. And one doesn't, I don't know, somebody, when isolated cases may be there where you trace all the contacts, but otherwise, okay, if you're found positive, you're isolated, but that is not enough. You have to trace all the contacts and so on. Now, how is this possible? Okay, here is the first major statement what central government should do. This is possible because there's a public health system, you see. Of course, this is a legacy of the past, not created now. But the present government, we have invested something like 2,000 crores from the budget and another 3,000 crores from outside the budget, created 5,700 posts. And this has been given a high priority health sector in Kerala and also public education. Now this has paid off. Now what India needs to do today, and I don't find that in these packages that are being pronounced. I would expect additional 2% of GDP to be invested in health today. Now I don't say now the GDP ratio has to be 4% into the future. You can bring it down to 3, because that is what is perhaps afford. But today we have to invest at least 2%. Make this crisis as an opportunity to build up a public health system. This is the minimum that everybody should come together. Now that means, one, every district should have a district hospital. Now use your disaster management law to acquire property, constructed building, and have a COVID center, which tomorrow can become a district public health center. You have this concept of wellness centers. Okay, have it. Now this is a time to have every primary health center converted into wellness centers. In Kerala, we are converting all our primary health centers into family welfare centers, investing money, so people and so on. So this is, I think, number one. And this has implications of post-COVID situation. We will be emerging from this crisis with a public health system, which can handle future pandemics. And even if pandemics don't occur, you can ensure that the nation becomes more healthy. And therefore, this is the first statement of the priority, that this crisis must be utilized to rebuild the public health system, which will deeply influence the future post-pandemic period. And also, we have to look at self-reliance in medical supplies and devices. India could become a leader in the supplying the third world cheap generic medicine. Let's have India generic medicine. Okay, we may not be getting the patents and so on, but we can always have India generic medicines. Okay, that's one. And this is in fact that Kerala is planning to do. Now, next one. Okay, you trace in contact and so on, but you want to keep the death rate low because we are opening up the economy. What do? You have reverse quarantining. That's simple. Yeah, all the vulnerable sections should be kept in the house. And healthy people should go out and work. Otherwise, how do people live? subsistence, their livelihood should be protected. So they should go out. But in the process, we should not just leave people on their own. All the aged and everyone who has multiple complications. Age means above 70. Multiple complications, all ages. And above 60 to 70, even if they have one hypertension or high diabetics, they should be quarantined. Not quarantined, asked to stay indoors. Now, Kerala, it is relatively easier because your houses, okay? In a country where you don't have houses, this is to everyone, this is going to be very difficult. Or you don't have separate latrine for elderly and others, going to be difficult. But this is something that we have got to do, we have to protect them. Otherwise, they are vulnerable to the disease and then things may go out of hand. Now, we have started the reverse quarantining process in Kerala. Many local governments have taken the initiative. It is just not asking them to stay inside. Okay, you have to have telemedicine so that they can contact the doctor. So our block centers are going to be, say, monitoring centers where you can call up and they connect to your doctor. Delivery at home, medicine, if necessary, food for destitute families, counseling, palliative care. This is the package. This has to be delivered. Now, so reverse quarantine, and then you open up. Now, opening up, where do you start opening? I think agriculture, allied sectors, fisheries, animal husbandry. I shall not go into the details because I think we need, everyone knows. But agriculture is something that can be carried on even under COVID times. And we should encourage people to take agriculture. And Kerala, we have been lagging behind agriculture. And when Prabhat was here, a lot of attention was given to self-sufficiency and so on. But now suddenly people are getting slightly frightened that your supplies may be cut off. And therefore now is the time we are saying everybody cultivate their own vegetables. And it's also therapy, a kind of occupational therapy for those who are staying indoors, in your kitchen gardens, growing, say, chicken. So we are thinking that we'll use opportunity to become self-sufficient in other than grains, okay, and also agro-processing industries, etc. Now, to do it, what's the main support that you are going to receive? Convert this National Rural Employment Guarantee Program, support of opening up the agricultural sectors. Now, how do you do that? You see, one, double the allocation from 60,000 crores rupees to 1.2 lakh crores. Minimum. This is a minimum I'm saying. And allow self-employment of marginal farmers are also part of the NREG work. And also, I would say, there is, have the record, what everybody earned last year. Increase the wages by another, say, 50 rupees or at least minimum another 25 rupees and use this to leverage, say, an advance of half last year's wages to every worker and as an advance, which is to be repaid from this additional 25 rupees you're going to give. You have already given something like 30 or 40 rupees. Okay, another additional, which over time, spread over 2 years, you recoup what you're giving, but provide them with some money, at least half the wages they earned last year. So NREGS is going to play very, very important role, spread it into also urban areas and migrant workers. Nothing, it's a sham, yesterday announcement. 11,000 crores rupees, do you know what it is about? It is nothing but the SDRF funds, okay, which is given by the Finance Commission Award. And central government said 25% of it can be used for migrant workers. Okay. So 25% of 11,000 crores. Kerala gets 157 crores. Okay, that's the amount. There's nothing being done. This is within the union list, interstate migration. And central government has to see they are transported and so on. And when they reach the home, pay at least some 5,000 or 7,500 rupees to their hands. So I would propose one drastic measure for the future. Now, there is every state has got construction workers welfare fund, though migrant workers are not construction workers, every one of them. But like a proportion of that fund can be utilized permanently, always earmarked for the migrant workers. Perhaps have a cess for the employers, which can be collected into a welfare fund. A fund should be created for not only emergencies, but also normal times to support the migrant workers. So now, these are made possible. I'm not going to go to other sectors. These are made possible in Kerala. That's this kind of intensive tracing, quarantining, now reverse quarantining, and opening up the agriculture in this manner, because we have local governments which are very vibrant. And therefore, this is, I think, a huge take from Kerala, not only public health system, the local governments in Kerala. This is the time to bring back the local governments into the national agenda. Everybody has forgotten it, given it up. In fact, central government doesn't mention a word in all these speeches being made to the nation and so on. Have you heard a mention of the local governments? Now, if you are going to say what is happening, what is Kerala's success, two pillars to this, public health and local government. Because now, let's say reverse quarantine. What is the number of involved? So 20% of the population here, or 15% minimum. Look at the numbers. Who will identify them? Ask them to stay home and don't go around and look after them, or coordinate this NREG work and so on. This is the local government. And therefore, this is a big thing, that the local government is the financing, and finally, the states. The government of India has just forgotten the states. There is something called the center, state, and local governments. Now, look, state governments, who are at the forefront of the fight, they have absolutely no income. Income of the state governments are 1/10 of the normal time. And this will be also in May. And therefore, what is being asked? Of the total 10% additional stimulus package percent of GDP, what has been demanded is just 2%. That's all. Of course, they're faking all this 10%. It's a joke. By the time this announcement of the finance minister is over, it will be known. But at the same time, what is demanded is an additional 2% for the states of borrowing power, and that the GST compensation due is paid to them. So what is the post-pandemic world should be in India? One, it should have strong state governments, okay. A restructuring of fiscal relations, let be the start. Should have strong local governments, who I think we have to bring back into the agenda. We will have a public health system. Our primary sector, livelihood of mass majority of people, much be a better base, on a much better foothold. And then perhaps we can also think about how we can advance in the post-dynamic world, which I am certain is going to be different. The present unipolar world is already gone. Perhaps it will become much more multipolar. And India can have a right place in that. I'm not going to speculate on this, etc. now. I think I have taken 20 minutes. I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Sir, we can already see there's a bunch of questions that have come up, but I must say that in bringing Kerala's success as a message to all of us, I think your critical message is that unless you build it from the ground up, making sure that the local governments are strong and stable, and the most essential aspects of living on, that of good public health measures and good support from the local governments and through the states to the public at large. That's the way to go forward. And what we are getting instead, as you have rightly said, is a lot of numbers which simply don't add up. And it's very worrying as we move forward how these numbers will be justified, because the institutional mechanisms to argue out the rationalization of these numbers are also non-functional today. So may I ask you, what as state governments can be done to hold the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister accountable to a certain sense of rational governance, so that we know that this economy is ours and it is working for us, and not just for a narrow section of people who seem to be benefiting?
I'll respond to this question, but I will want to also listen to the panel. So I'll stay
No, you will stay for beyond 2:45?
Very brief response to it. See, look at the situation today. As even the opposition political parties have got a common understanding how to fight the COVID. Not a single statement of that. This is terrible. There is no alternative political proposition as to how to deal with the COVID. So I think how to make a Prime Minister and Finance Minister and so on more accountable. I think it's time. I don't know, you call for a seminar. I don't want to now add to the distances, but you don't turn up some of the people. So I think this is very, very important. They have to come together. Not the left parties, I'm saying, but Congress and the regional parties, everybody. Not for many minimum political program, but on COVID, what is to be done? What should be done? Second, we could also contribute to that process by going towards an alternative platform. That people are speaking, we are speaking, other people are speaking. We had a web seminar from Kerala. Well, bringing together, getting a public opinion. There's a limitation to it that we can't have travel and so on. But nevertheless, using the modern technology, we should be possible to communicate. And also have from the civil society a statement, what should be done, which should be backed by who is who in India. You should be able to bring them in. Broad enough. You don't, if something is some professional body, drop it. Okay, this we can agree upon. Okay, we can also say this is a point we don't agree, but all of us don't agree, but this is a thing. Therefore, such emergence of such a platform and alternative also would contribute to putting pressure on these political parties to come together and make a statement. Has there been even a statement? It's a tragedy of India now. So I think that's how we can make them accountable. It's no other way.
Just quickly run some questions. Sir, will you stay with us beyond 2:45?
I will.
Or you'll be there till what time, sir?
Yeah, don't worry. I would like to hear others.
Sure. Then can I say that we'll get to the questions later before we have to leave? Yeah. So then I will invite the other speakers in, so you also get to hear them. So my invitation next is to Dr. Vandana Shiva. She's a physicist, philosopher, and ecofeminist. Has been involved with the Chipko movement and a variety of citizen action against environmental destruction, and established Navdanya, and right now she's in Dehradun, from where she is speaking in a wonderful farm, from where I guess she imagines how to protect biodiversity and ensure farmers' rights is not subordinate to corporate rights. Of course, she is widely, she's published on various issues. So I invite Vandana to actually speak on the kind of paradigms which are critical now to ensure that humanity does not suffer from this type of a situation which the pandemic has forced us into. And I would also argue and ask if it is possible for you to touch on whether the pandemic is being used to strengthen the state's power over people, and how do we overcome and ensure the state is subordinate to the people's will.
Thank you, Leo. Thank you, Thomas Issac. Your health minister is top news in The Guardian, and everyone is sending me the Guardian article saying how Kerala has shown the way based exactly on the issues you raised, on public health, on universal education, on basically defending the commons and the public good, and democratic participation in the real meaning of the term. I see the COVID crisis, and including the lockdown, I don't think we can separate the virus from the actions. I see it as a perfect storm of three trends that have been building up over the last centuries. And they're really trends of colonization, they're trends of extractivism, they're trends of invasion. The first is what has been called the metabolic rift between humans and nature, this assumed separation between humans and nature, and then through anthropocentrism, defining some humans as masters and property owners of nature as a dead, inert matter. Now that is the part that I have been totally awake to. I realize every plant, every worm, every microbe is very alive, and it's time for us to become humble in this world. The corona itself begins in the forest, as 300 new epidemics do in the last few decades. And this is because we are invading into the ecosystems of other species. The Nipah virus, the Kiasnur disease, the Ebola virus, they all are a result of invasion. The second metabolic rift is separating society, because what Thomas talked about in terms of public goods, I call them the commons of our pastures and our forests and our rivers and our water and our public health and our education, the commons of our democracy. Enclosing the commons includes a metabolic rift between people in society and taking away the resources of the members of the community. So you need a social metabolic rift to enclose any common. The third big rift, which I think is playing out in a very, very big way, both in our understanding of the corona crisis and in the recipes being offered, is a very strange construction of the separation of the mind and the body. And you know, Kerala is such an important source of having kept Ayurveda alive. The body is a very, very important, intelligent, self-organized, complex organism. And that's what Ayurveda builds on. The separation of the body and mind meant that women could be defined into only bodies for reproduction, no mind. Workers, peasants could just be defined for bodies for extraction of labor for generation of surplus value. And the minds were those of the extractive masters. I have had to deal with the question of biopiracy, the stealing of our turmeric and our neem and our tulsi and our basmati and our wheat, by saying, no, you don't have knowledge. It's when we take it as knowledge, it becomes intellectual property, it becomes an invention. And this issue of piracy is so naturalized in a colonizing idea. And this world of superiority creates a mind that's militaristic because it must invade. It is mechanistic. It sees the whole world as dead, inert manipulation. And it is a monoculture because it wants to make the world into an image that it has shaped. And whether it's in agriculture or it's in society, this has been the disease we have seen grow. I wasn't supposed to work on agriculture. I started to work on agriculture because of Punjab and Bhopal in 1984. And I realized that this was no more agriculture. Agriculture is care for the land. This was instruments of war brought from Hitler's labs, turned into agrochemicals, and all of the science of plants and agriculture twisted to make us believe that without chemicals you can't have food. Let me just run through a few definitions, and I do hope Kerala will lead in redefining the agriculture and economic vocabulary. Yield. Yield only measures the commodity that you extract. But a spice garden of Kerala that has been standing for thousands of years was the reason for amazing trade even before the East India Company. Those spice gardens don't have a yield of one monoculture. They produce many gifts, very high value gifts, to the extent that a bag of pepper used to bring us a bag of gold. That is the diversity of agriculture. Yield only measures a commodity monoculture. And that's why in Navdanya we have shifted to measuring nutrition per acre, health per acre, and true wealth per acre, the incomes that farmers generate, because we've evolved out of this necessity of chemicals and commodity seeds and intellectual property on seeds. We've created a debt-creating system. And farmers have been trapped in debt. That's why 400,000 of them have committed suicide. And sadly, in the package, I was very worried because at no point was public investment talked about. Everything was, you can take a loan. And my people in the Himalaya are so worried because they're talking about the boys who've returned from the cities, all migrant labor. They're being told, don't worry, you can live the same life as the city, just take a loan, mortgage your land. And we will see a whole new landlessness if the lessons of land reform and the lessons of what I call Bhuswarat, sovereignty of land, aren't defended vigorously. In terms of where that colonizing mind, based on separation and takeover, was wanting to take us, the Green Revolution was one stop. And then we had the second Green Revolution with GMOs, and cotton became the worst area. The same players are now talking of farming without farmers. And you and I have looked at initial stages of digitalization and financialization of agriculture under the language of zero budget in Andhra Pradesh. They're talking about food without farmers. Just today in England, people wanted to have farming and food in an agriculture bill. And they said no. Now agriculture will only be about maintaining wilderness, but that's what wilderness area management was supposed to be. And there's a whole new trend of food without farms and food without farmers. Where does it take us? We're already seeing an impossible burger. Fake food constituted in labs. Forget the farmers, forget health, forget annam sharva aushadhi, that food is our best medicine. And even in the COVID crisis, we have seen that at least if COVID is 0.5 to 1% mortality, the chronic diseases because of bad food trying to play tricks on our health is shooting it up to 9.6%. Under diabetes, cancer 7%, air pollution and toxic pollution, even across the world, and this is a report we should do, how the mortality is highest where the toxicity of our bodies is highest. So they're talking about no farmers and digital agriculture. They're talking about food that won't be food. And it's going to increase these epidemic diseases. And I would request again, Thomas and the government of Kerala, being the holder and custodian of the richest health tradition of the world, Ayurveda, to put out an amazing paper on what is health, what's the human body, and that junk food cannot be part of the solution. I was just looking, Amazon, which can't deliver fresh food, it can only deliver processed food. Amazon is, Jeff Bezos will be a trillionaire in 6 years' time. He's already made 24 billion additional money during the lockdown of COVID as this shift from local, from fresh is changing our mind. But the part that for me is most worrying and I'll be writing this hopefully by Monday, I'll have it done and I'll make sure I send it to all of you, is a new patent on biopiracy. No more of our plants, now of our body. We have become the new raw material. We are the new mine for data of our bodies, data of our minds, to create a new economy that is not about real wealth. We had a small step at the time of demonetization where they said cash is bad, digital is good, but even digital money will be obsolete if this project comes through, because they want to value each human being according to a cryptocurrency the billionaires and the tech giants will assign to us after mining our data. Already with the lockdown and the throwaway people, we can witness that there is this thinking we don't need most people. And therefore there's no planning for them. And that's why the people's agenda for a new imagination has to be a planning for the earth, for the people. I think another of the rifts that I think has been so wrong is the way we defined productivity in agriculture. And years back when I was working on globalization, there was, these graphs used to come out of the international agencies, the bubbles keep growing. And when I look closely, are we growing more food? Is the bubble more food for more people? No, it's just the land acreage that a farmer farms. So with no farmers, you're going to reach infinity in food productivity. This is the trick. Human beings are not inputs in the agriculture system. The inputs are energy, and we have an inefficient system where you'll be using 10 units of energy to produce 1 unit of food. It's a negative economy. The industrial agriculture is a negative economy. Ecological economy of the kind we practice in Navdanya, 1 unit produces 10 units of nourishing good food. And if we did it that way, and I was very, very privileged to work on the organic policy for Kerala, as well as the GMO-free policy for Kerala, that if we do biodiversity intensification and we do ecological farming, we can feed 2 times India's population. And in the process, we get rid of the chemicals and the fossil fuels that are destroying work, because their only objective, if you use Roundup and glyphosate, which gives cancer, the only work it does is get rid of labor involved in weeding, which very often is harvesting of the medicinal plants, of the greens that are very nutritious for us. What is a combined harvester? Just a way to get rid of people in harvest. And years ago in the 80s, when I had gone to Kerala to look at, I had to evaluate a dam project. And in the villages, the choir making was giving so much employment. And I was told Kerala made a decision that they will think of people and not mechanize choir making. I think it is extremely important for enlightened governments, active citizens to say, where are the tools appropriate? And which tools must be adopted by democratic societies? In a society with so many hands, defining efficiency as getting rid of hands isn't a very smart process. So I say what we need to do is reduce the ecological footprint, which is ruining this planet. And the floods of Kerala are one recent example. And we need to increase the handprint. And I hope together in the new imagination, instead of treating our bodies as dumb mass, we will turn our bodies into the instrument of an economy of care. Agriculture is an economy of care. Economy of care is, of course, all the wonderful people taking care of people during this crisis. But the economy of care is every time you circulate, every time you give back. When you have local panchayats and local economies like Kudumshri, that's an economy of care. When you ensure you give back to the earth, you give back the water, you give back the soil fertility, it's an economy of care. And that economy will regenerate the earth. And of course, not an accident in this COVID crisis, all the clearances of the most destructive projects have been done. And it was so absolutely unjustified. So reclaiming democracy becomes a very, very important part. And it will have to happen at all levels. We have to replace the monoculture of the mind which tends towards centralization and uniformity, with a diversity of the mind, which builds true democracies, protects the diversity in nature, protects the diversity on our farms, which is how we've done farming, protects the diversity in our community, and most importantly, allows us to think differently. I was reading the tweet from our Prime Minister, who had a conversation with dear Bill Gates. Now, Bill Gates wants a future where no child will ever go to school. He just signed an agreement with the governor of New York. Why do we need schools? Why do we need teachers? Let the kids learn digitally. They're already talking about smartware, they call it. I call it spyware. Spyware, so that when you work from home, they can keep track of, are you concentrating? Where did you move? What's your blood pressure like? Are you excited? Are you paying attention? We need to defend our humanity. This is the moment to defend freedom, humanity, the earth, and everything good that we have created in all of these centuries. The best of our country, the best of the world. This moment won't come back. We cannot afford farms without farmers, food without farms, schools without, education without schools. This is a dystopia, and it must be stopped. And I know we have a power to stop it together.
Thank you, Vandana. This is an extraordinary moment, as you rightly say, because this is when we realize our bodies are being captured within our own homes by a state of fear, which is, maybe later on in life, later on in history, when you look back at these times, there may be a lot of questions we'll ask about whether we did all right in dealing with the virus and its capacity to infect us. But I think, what you rightly assert is this is the moment to defend our freedoms, our humanity, and especially to make sure farms are with farmers and schools are with students. And it shouldn't be the way Bill Gates wants it. I think that's a kind of note which would rightly bring in the struggle that the workers are going through. The majority of the population is struggling with this pandemic. With rare exceptions, such as in Kerala, where they are termed as guests, across the country, we are seeing this horrific struggle of people trying to get away from a system which has exploited them and in their weakest moment has nothing to give back to them, that they now go back to the very villages and homes from which they left, hoping for a better life, and now they are returning to those homes, hoping that they will be accepted back. Never in history has this kind of a tragedy ever been written. But it seems that when the Supreme Court just this morning said, why should I take up a PIL about the migrant workers? That the lawyer apparently came with a bunch of press clippings and nothing more. I wondered what else could the lawyer have done when he's not allowed to travel and find out document evidence, because the state after state after state is not documenting the atrocities that are being played out on millions of migrants who are walking home. And we have seen hundreds already killed, probably equivalent or more than the virus has done. Now, that's the kind of question situation which I think Aruna Roy has engaged with in so many ways for a very, very long time. She has worked with workers since she left the Indian Administrative Service a long time ago. And the fact that what Dr. Issac said about the importance of making NREGA work countrywide and ensuring it works for everyone in a much more resilient way, she was one of those who helped build it. Apart from, of course, helping craft the Right to Information Act, which was not just about having a law, but ensuring that governments work with transparency and accountability normatively and particularly when there are emergencies. And we have seen that this government in the center has particularly worked to mask everything, not just our faces, but mask every detail of what governance should be. So on that note, I invite Aruna Roy of MKSS to kindly make her intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Liu, and very happy to be with Dr. Issac and Vandana and Prabhat. I couldn't have asked for a better set of comrades to speak with. So I just want to begin by saying that MKSS began its history by trying to look at workers' rights, talking about migration. I can't sing like my colleague Shankar. Otherwise, I'd have sung the song that we first sang. One of the first songs we sang in 1999 was on migration. What happens to the migrant worker? He leaves home thinking that he's going to work in a city and bring back money. And the whole family looks forward to the money that he's going to bring back, or she is going to bring back. Because more often there was a she also involved. They went to work, and when they came back ill, sick, and without money. So we tried to build the MKSS on the basis that you must not migrate, that you must really work in your own area to bring in a better economy, to make your panchayats work better, like Kerala, of course, has always been a great inspiration, and to look at the way you can make the local self-government system function for you. The irony today that even after fighting for and getting the MGNRG in place, Rajasthan has huge amounts of migrant labor going out. Much of the building and contract labor is from Rajasthan, as are many other important kinds of labor that go from here. So we were talking about it. There are so many complex issues. So I'll just say post-COVID, we unfortunately have the same predicament of using this Zoom for talking to each other, which we do everybody. So there are 40 or 50 of us on the Zoom every morning trying to find out what's happening in various parts of Rajasthan as well as parts of India and how we can coordinate to put pressure on the government. But the same Zoom that we use today is also going to be technology which is going to make us totally dependent. And as Vandana was saying, not only is it digital schooling, I'm afraid we are going to become digital mobilizers and digital protesters at one stage. I hope that doesn't happen. But everybody finds it so much more convenient to sit in their rooms rather than go and stand out in the scorching sun and fight and shout. So I hope it doesn't become a habit. That's a fear. I don't think it's going to happen with us, but it may in fact become a habit. Anyway, to talk about what is happening, we were talking in the morning conversation, and Sushila, one of my great comrades who also fought for the NRG and the RTI, whose slogan of our money, our account has gone the rounds. She said that she went to a village and she asked this woman, and she was talking about hunger and poverty and all that. And that woman said, she said, you know, if my cloth, and they're all now wearing very, very decrepit cloth because they've all come back from work and they've left their clothes behind. So she said, if there's a tear in my sari, or in my lugdi, it's the veil, I can stitch it. But if there's a tear in my, can it be remedied? I'm going to say it in Hindi because it's so much more powerful. She said, मेरी लुगड़ी में लुगड़ी फटे तो उसकी तो मैं टाँके लगा सकती हूँ. मेरा पेट फटेगा तो क्या मैं टाँके लगा सकती हूँ? इसका टाँका कौन लगाएगा? So the level of hunger, endemic hunger, and the kind of poverty that is now imminent and threatens these people is huge. So even in the slightly more well-off families, well-off in what sense? That they can at least provide for food for the next 15 to 20 days. My colleagues were telling me that their families are now not really buying anything more than chili, atta, and oil. The investment in chili has gone up phenomenally because chili is a salivator and it's something you can use to eat your dry rotis with. So chili consumption has gone up because that's the only way they can make their food edible. Anyway, this is just to bring to you the kind of ambiance within which the whole thing is working today. Now, in the case of Rajasthan and in the case of wherever MKSS has been working, we've always begun with talking to the people. But we feel terribly deprived that we are unable now to talk to the migrants to find out exactly what they would like. NRG began as, this present part of the NRG campaign, which began in the late 1990s, began with intense talking to workers to find out what would they like, how would they like it. how would it perform, where would it perform best, so that they decide, like the People's Plan, where you went to the people and you understood what they wanted, and then something like that has lasted for so long. It was also a repeat, in a sense, of the same process, going to the people to find out what they would like. Now, where are we and how will we talk to the migrants? It's a big challenge. We simply don't know how to talk to them. We talk to them in small pockets of 15 stranded here, 30 stranded there, hundreds and thousands stranded in Jaipur or Delhi, but we're not talking to them from a platform where we can mobilize their opinion and make it into some kind of policy. I think that's a huge, huge, huge problem with the present system. While everything is colossal, because there are lakhs of people who are now migrants, everyone is limited by this small scale within which we can actually have a face-to-face conversation or a face-to-face policy discussion, face-to-face, anything at all. So in this colossal problem that we have got, we have to depend on government. There is no way we can not depend on government. And to depend on governments, you have to have spaces for dialogue. Where are the platforms for dialogue? There are no protests possible. It's a sort of a vicious cycle. It's a huge challenge. On the one hand, we have what this Prime Minister made a statement. I mean, he's made so many grand gestures. One more grand gesture about so many lakh crores being available, but no comment about how much will come to the poor. It's an overarching commitment of 20 lakh crores from the richest to the poorest. So one doesn't know which part and how much of it is going to come to the poor. A wise and democratic, constitutionally responsible government like Kerala would create a participatory system. But are we going to be able to get that government of India to do it? And how is it going to inform us about this situation in this country? It's a challenge, I think, daunting challenge for all of us. And in that sense, can we now, as part of people's demands, ask for a People's Integration Council? We want a People's Integration Council. We want an Indian Integration Council set up. Are we going to be able to make it work? Can we start with a small amount of states that will be willing to join that? Can we start, say for instance, poor Dr. Issac, we're piling onto him, but can it start with Kerala? Because you're here with us today. Can it start with you? And then proceed from Kerala to many other sympathetic states, which will join us. All public action is adversarial, but look at the predicament of public action today. The moment you go into public action or any kind of community action today, you're forbidden by the virus and then by the concepts of how we should behave in the public domain, a la the CAA and many other acts that have come into being. And we are now victims of all kinds of accusations. In this entire system and scenario, the most tragic thing has been that communalization of the virus, which Kerala has dealt with quite well, as we all know, the communalization of virus has become so deeply entrenched that we have republic of small villages. I was shocked that you have now dug trenches around these villages, and the villagers are preventing anyone who may be a Muslim from entering because they think the virus is spread by the religion. Not only that, in a district like Barmer in Rajasthan, you first ask the vendor who's selling vegetables, what his caste is. What is, of course, caste in Rajasthan means also religion. So in the local language, they say, what's your caste? And if he is a Muslim, then woe to the vegetables that he's selling because nobody will touch the vegetables. In this kind of tremendous amount of propaganda that is now being sent through fear of a different sort. First, it was a different kind of fear. But what a bonanza for the government that all of us have willingly withdrawn into our homes and shut our doors. And now we are not going out. And what more would they want? Because they have free access to any kind of propaganda and send it anywhere without the kind of public force that was emerging to protest against that kind of propaganda. So how are we going to, in fact, fight all this? But there are some ways perhaps in which we can do something. One is to go back to the whole notion of the welfare state and strengthen it. I think this should be our demand. And I think I'm saying, I'm using a kind of shorthand because I'm running short of time. We'll have to deal with decentralization a la Kerala, but a la all our campaigns as well, where we've talked about it. So we are together with the government of Kerala, but also across all the campaigns, that we should now also have our own platform for talking about the decentralization process as necessary. We have also learned that if you do it during times of peace, you're good at times of war. If you do it at times when you're healthy, you're okay when you have a pandemic or an epidemic, which Kerala has shown. We also need open-ended MGNREGA programs, because the MGNREGA, like the New Deal that Roosevelt brought in the United States immediately after the Depression, and got everyone working, and they did any kind and every kind of thing. So we need to have 100 days guarantee as it is according to the law now, but diversify, as Prabhat and others have said, and make sure that you can have painters paint. The University of Illinois is painted by people who painted it during the Great Depression. Beautiful murals that are there all over Illinois. So why can't we use our singers? How can we use our painters? Why can't we use services, extension to services? Why can't they teach music? We'll have to think out of the box, and there are many things we can do. We'll have to give more power to Wat Sabhas and Gram Sabhas, as I said, and we'll have to deal with economic development seen from bottom up. And to see it from bottom up, we'll have to devise new methods of interaction with communities. We'll also have to argue for a rights-based, the rights-based legislations, but also a new spate of them if we need them. We must talk about how the directive principles of state policy apply equally, and we have to fight for the constitution. Because at the bottom of all this, with the Prime Minister Care Fund not being transparent, that we are told that not even the CAG can have a look at the PM Care, we are now really regressing dramatically. So we are now going back to a stage when we couldn't see what the Raja did or the Maharaja did. Today we can't see what the Prime Minister does. Why shouldn't it be open to scrutiny? In fact, I think it should be open to an ordinary person's scrutiny. A letter, an RTI filed by a local person should be answered. But it will not show its accounts even to the CAG. So this is frightening. What about the labor laws? Setting aside the labor laws, any new paradigm we enter now will have to demand that we get back all our basic rights, labor rights. How are we going to fight anything at all without it? So it's that we have to, as Vandana also mentioned, we need all kinds of land rights back where they were in place, and we want trade unions to be reinstated with their former glory. We want worker participation and ownership underlined. We also want to protect all kinds of democratic rights to protect labor and other movements. So we need to really think of the post-COVID economy as a new economy in which certain older values must be reinstated. If there's going to be a new economy, how does it change? And one of the principal things that are worries that immediately we face is this huge amount of rural labor. Our MGNREGA unions have doubled and trebled in some places. And the new entrants are all young men. They are men who always thought it was below their dignity to join in MGNREGA, constant MGNREGA workforce. It was only women's work because it was halka pulka kam. Marad to bahar jaake bahut paisa kamata hai. They've all returned. They're all involved in it. They're talking about diversification of MGNREGA and how it can help them. And at this point, we must also talk about an urban employment program, because an urban employment program is as important as a rural employment program now, because lots of our young people and are unemployed, and even our migrant workers are all stranded in small towns and in cities, which MGNREGA doesn't cover. But last and most important is that we need to get together, not only हम अंग्रेजी बोलने वाले, मगर also the Hindi and Tamil and Malayalam and Bangla बोलने वाले, and all the various communities that only speak their natural language, whatever their local language is. We need to get together as we got together for the original MGNREGA. We need to have campaigning. The last challenge is, how do we campaign? How do we start a movement in COVID times with just this Zoom or some other platform like this being available? And are we going to call the Prime Minister to book for putting us into this kind of cage? It's actually Sone ki Pinjari. In a Sone ka Pinjara, we are all sitting, and actually we have gone in voluntarily and locked and bolted the doors. So I think we must also argue for limited amount of freedom to get out of our homes, whatever we wear masks, so we carry anything else that to prevent the spread of the disease. But the spread of the disease of centralization of fascism is as bad as the spread of the COVID, so far as we are concerned. So there must be somewhere where we can exercise political freedom to get our political rights back. Thank you.
I think you rightly ended by saying the disease is not just COVID, and COVID is being used by much more destabilizing diseases that of centralization and fascism. And thanks for making the strong argument for expanding the NREGA across the country, across rural India, but most especially also to urban India. On that note, I invite Professor Prabhat Patnaik. We all know from his writings what his positions are, vis-a-vis the kind of policies that are now in play, and also on Hindutva, for instance. He has been a professor emeritus at the Center for Economic Studies and Planning at the School of Social Sciences at Jawaharlal Nehru University, and has also worked with the State Planning Board of Kerala between 2006 and 2011. Professor, I would like you to speak a little bit on a recent article that you have written along with Jayati Ghosh and Harshvandar, and it's aptly titled "A Plan to Revive a Broken Economy." Could you provide us some details about the quality of the care economy that you speak of how to ensure that the wealth which is accumulating in the hands of 2% of India's population, or probably 1% of India's population, can be rightly disbursed across so that we all enjoy from the wealth we create, and particularly in the methods that you argue are necessary, which is not to have a limit of 100 days on NREGS, but to make it all year round, and also to extend it to urban India.
Thank you very much. Pleasure really that I am with Issac and Aruna and Vandana. One point with which I would like to begin is that the kind of economic arrangements under which the world has been living for the last 4 decades at least, and which in a sense defined our entire set of economic policy responses across all countries, is no longer viable. In other words, this economic arrangement, which I call neoliberal globalization, has really run its course. Now, this was obvious even before the pandemic began. The world economy had slowed down considerably, as had the Indian economy, and there was no response which the governments of various countries could make. There was no fiscal response that anybody could make to this slowing down in order to get the world economy out of this rut. Exactly the same is true of India. So this was becoming clear that within the old economic arrangement, where, for instance, government fiscal activism to increase employment was frowned upon, fiscal deficits were frowned upon, taxing the rich to generate larger demand through government expenditure was frowned upon, there was really no possibility of getting the world economy out of this rut. Now, of course, the pandemic has actually brought this particular contradiction absolutely to the fore, because with the pandemic, it is clear that either you spend in order to bring about, provide some relief to the poor, or if you don't, in that case, you have to be a silent spectator to their acute suffering. Now, some countries have been actually spending substantial amounts, substantial proportion of their GDP without bothering about the limits that finance insists upon, like, for instance, 3% of GDP, or can be extended to 4%, while in the United States, as you know, 10% of GDP was earmarked to start with. In Germany, 5%. In Japan, 20% of GDP was earmarked as part of a fiscal passage. But as far as we are concerned, we have not been able to do this. As Issac and everybody else mentioned earlier, the package which we have put together basically amounts to asking banks to give credit to people. Now, that is really not a fiscal package of any kind. Therefore, we have not been able to put together to kind of, incur the wrath of finance in a situation where every other country, or at least most other countries, are daring to do so. Now, I think this difference between the two situations is quite important because, in my view, unless you move towards a welfare state at this moment in defiance of finance, and I'll come to this in a moment, if you continue to toe the line of finance, then you'll have to become increasingly authoritarian, and likewise, in order to garner public support, you have to play on communalism. Therefore, on one side, we have a path of communal authoritarianism with no aid to the people, and on the other side we have the necessity and the possibility of building a welfare state in defiance of the dictates of finance. Now, I believe, in fact, many people have been talking about it. I mean, you'd be absolutely surprised by the degree to which people in the West, including spokesmen of finance, are really talking about it. Just the other day, the IMF, for instance, said that what we did to Greece, you know, a couple of years ago, a few years ago, when Syriza came to power and wanted some relief in terms of debt relief from EU, that was just vetoed. And so the IMF said that the kind of thing that we did to Greece in order to appease finance, which we did to the Greek people, was completely wrong. In other words, many people are talking about it. In fact, the London Financial Times has been having editorials saying that we are now in a kind of Roosevelt-Keynes moment. In the 1930s, you remember, there was talk that if capitalism is to come out of the crisis, then it becomes necessary for it to have what Roosevelt called a New Deal. It has to have state intervention, a very proactive role of the state in spending on welfare expenditures. Now, I think we are really in a moment like that currently. Now, in that, therefore, it's very important for all of us to really argue that the way that we tackle the COVID crisis, and indeed the more general economic crisis which preceded it, is to really have a kind of much larger role for the state, a proactive role, and a proactive role that essentially doesn't concentrate at all on the external market, on export markets, on neoliberal globalization policies, which essentially try to introduce export-led growth into the economy. On the contrary, since the world economy is not going to be growing very, very fast in the foreseeable future, this is the time that we have to concentrate on the domestic market. When we talk about the domestic market really has three essential components. One is agricultural growth. Not even agriculture, the growth of peasant agriculture. The growth of peasant agriculture is absolutely essential for the growth of the domestic market. In fact, it's a determinant, a major determinant of the growth of the domestic market. The second is, of course, redistributive policies inside the country, so that you have the obscene increases in inequalities of wealth and incomes which have occurred in the period of neoliberal globalization are actually now brought down, and this is done on the one hand by imposing heavy taxes, wealth taxes in particular, upon the rich, and using the proceeds to finance a substantial increase in welfare expenditure, increase in expenditure on education, on healthcare, on the care economy, and generally on transfers or increase in the social wage. And the third aspect is that you cannot enlarge your domestic market, and at the same time, your domestic market cannot just be left free and open, because in that case, you are really not generating domestic employment at all. Therefore, in order to do that and to have an increase in the social wage, in the living standards of the population, you'll have to protect those living standards from getting undermined by cheaper imports from outside. Therefore, some degree of protection would become necessary. And the moment you do all this, then finance is going to leave the country, and therefore you'd have to have some control on financial outflows. By the way, finance is already leaving the country, which is why the rupee has stumbled greatly in the recent past, and this has to be stopped. And to do so, you have to have a degree of financial control. Therefore, what we need to do is to put in an alternative economic regime that relies on the home market, that relies on promoting agricultural growth, that relies on building up a welfare state, and that does so with some degree of delinking from this entire phenomenon of neoliberal globalization to which we had been subjected in the last 4 decades almost. I mean, in our case, a bit less, 3 decades, but generally the world has been subjected to in the last 4 decades. Now, the moment one actually looks at promoting agricultural growth, peasant agriculture, also many other possibilities open up. This period in which we had growth in the regime of neoliberal globalization witnessed, of course, much higher rates of GDP growth. I mean, there are some doubts about how much higher it was, but let's assume it was much higher rates of GDP growth, almost a doubling of the GDP growth compared to the preceding few decades. But on the other hand, this is a period in which, as some of the preceding speakers were saying, you find an increase in hunger and you find an increase in poverty defined in terms of the minimum calorific norm, how much do you, how many people satisfy it, how many people don't. So the moment you look at poverty, poverty actually increased in this period. And why did it increase? It seems to me that a very fundamental determinant of the magnitude of poverty, what happens to it and so on, is really the growth of agricultural output. Agricultural growth, particularly growth of food grains production, is a very important determinant of what happens to poverty. It's a determinant not just from the supply side, that yes, you have more food grains and therefore people can eat more, but rather it's also from the demand side, because food grains production is quite labor intensive, and therefore it also puts purchasing power. Food grains production within peasant agriculture. When I talk about agriculture, I mean peasant agriculture. Food grain production within peasant agriculture is highly labor intensive, and it puts purchasing power in the hands of the people, and that in turn also creates demand for food grains. Therefore, hunger is satisfied and they meet their minimum calorific norms. So the shift towards emphasizing food grain production would be a very good thing, and that shift would be necessitated if we do not wish to have a communal, authoritarian, fascistic way of coping with the crisis, coping with this end of liberalization to which the world has actually moved, and which the COVID-19 crisis has actually highlighted. Along with that, if you have an increase in agricultural output and in food grains output, it becomes possible to start a whole new wave of rural industrialization through rural enterprises. Because on the one hand, local demand is generated, and if local demand is generated, then of course it becomes easier for local enterprises to meet that demand. And on the other hand, you can actually generate local supplies for food processing. You can have enterprises for which increased agricultural growth would actually provide the wherewithal in terms of inputs, so that you can have the supplies also for these enterprises. Now, this is an avenue which I believe has very great potential. And for instance, I believe the township and village enterprises in China were a remarkable success, and they were built upon building in rural areas these enterprises which actually drew on local labor. And what is more, that is also something which can actually be panchayat owned. I think Issac made this very important point that actually people have forgotten about the role of decentralization, the role of panchayats and so on. But we can now think in terms of panchayats not just being an administrative machinery, but panchayats actually owning enterprises. And these enterprises can actually be rural enterprises, which can be highly employment generating. Therefore, I believe that the scope for a whole new pattern of industrialization, pattern of development has now got opened up with neoliberal globalization reaching a dead end. But that is something which has to be utilized. Likewise, I completely agree with Aruna that actually urban employment guarantee scheme has to be introduced. In some states, there is an experiment with that. In Kerala, we tried to put that in, but of course, it has to be revamped, it has to be introduced. And you can use the MGNREGS in rural areas as well as in urban areas in order to subsidize some of these very small enterprises, particularly panchayat-owned enterprises, which might come up and fill the entrepreneurial gap which is bound to arise if suddenly demand is generated but you don't have enterprises. And that is something which can therefore sustain itself on the basis of MGNREGS help. But all this alternative trajectory of development is one which is going to be very bitterly fought by finance. I believe that, while all kinds of possibilities open up, we must not remain indifferent to the kind of challenges which lie ahead. Because the moment you do this, then you'll be considered a rogue state and all kinds of sanctions may be imposed against you. And then there would be, like other countries are facing, then there'll be all kinds of efforts to scuttle this program that you may have launched. Fortunately, as I said, now in the world itself, there is a general recognition of the need to change trajectories, to change strategies, but that itself is not enough to make sure that our experiment with an alternative strategy would not meet with severe opposition, particularly external opposition. Internal, of course, but particularly external opposition. So we require the broadest possible unity, and we require a kind of single-mindedness of purpose in order to get out of this log jam. I think I better finish there. Thank you.
I think, you've helped us to bring so many strong interventions that have been made about how we can revamp this economy without dehumanizing it, and given us a pathway to appreciate how India can function without being subordinated by global capital. Sincerely appreciate it, and we particularly definitely appreciate the reaffirmation of the Kerala model, which is really how to build things from the ground up, the panchayat system, and how now the urban system should also be similarly re-energized, so that we create jobs locally, we create good lives locally, so people don't have to migrate so much and distress migrate back. It's the kind of time when we should now be looking at the questions that have come in. We have another 45 minutes of discussion time. Lots of questions have come. I also want to say that for those who have joined in a little later, on Twitter you can find many key points have been micro-blogged. You just have to look for the handle at E_S_G. And you can quickly catch up. But let me go back to questions that came first, and that was to Dr. Thomas Issac. The question really is about self-sufficiency, and Samir asks how Kerala managed to get farmer co-ops going everywhere and helping build systems which have become so helpful during the pandemic. And in a related question, Katyayani Chamraj says, how did you create this farmer cooperatives and FPOs and the procurement centers for fruits and vegetables and for milk and other products? How did you bring them all together, and so that farmers don't have to dump their produce due to lack of transportation? Because one of the worst impacts of the lockdown was nothing could move, and farmers particularly suffered a lot. And how did you manage that, sir?
Well, it's not simply just directly farmer cooperatives. One, we have a very powerful credit cooperatives, farmers, banks. They contribute to about 40% of the agricultural credit. And then more than direct cooperatives cultivating land, we have various types of arrangements, like self-help groups cultivating, the farmers from an area having a certain joint farming operations from taken. So it's a kind of much more flexible system. Inevitable platforms of aggregating the produce. So it's not a kind of one single model that is being played out. A lot of flexibility is given to what kind of organizational form you require. So that's the one first response. Second, lockdown, we don't cultivate rice as much. It's all commercial crops. In fact, only less than 20% of the area is under food crops. And therefore, we didn't face the kind of situation that many people around faced. But still, when suddenly lockdown came, we are also in the midst of harvesting whatever paddy fields are left. And there was a problem. One, the paddy field, we arranged the millers to take them. And farmers were paid by the cooperatives. That's the arrangement now. There's a public procurement of all the paddy, which is given to the millers because we don't have sufficient storage facilities. But then immediate payment is made by the cooperatives to the farmers. There was a problem of harvesters not having sufficient harvesters, but we managed it.
So there's a slightly related question in terms of this is how you managed despite the constraints. But there is a constraint which the center has imposed on all states, and particularly Kerala has suffered a lot. And that is the GST compensation is in 4 months arrears. Can you say what kind of a situation can we expect in the years to come when the center plays this type of a game with states?
Very frankly, I have started losing faith in the center. I think only recourse is upward in the Supreme Court. Because central government is duty bound to give it. That's the law. Now, for example, the month of April, total collection of GST is for 3,500 is less than 200 crores. Entire amount has to be compensated. Center has been trying to persuade, pressurize states to have a consensus to revise the law. Now this mandatory is saying that we never envisaged such a situation will have come and that we had to compensate for this full amount. And therefore, let us relook the clauses. So this struggle has been going on. I think the center now would owe states something like 1 lakh crores. It's not a small amount. Last financial year's 3 months compensation and the entire GST collection for the month of April and May. See, now there is a real problem. The compensation cess fund doesn't have sufficient resources. Now, this was discussed in detail in the GST Council before the Constitutional Amendment. Then the finance minister guaranteed, assured the state finance ministers was, if such a contingency comes, the solution is very simple. Central government will agree for the cess fund to borrow from the market and pay it. And it would be a simple process of extending the compensation cess from 5 years, which is within the law, to another year or more till whatever borrowed money is recouped. It's very simple operation, but I don't know why they are refusing to look at it. When mutual funds are in trouble, next day 50,000 crores rupees go. And somebody else is there, okay, you support it. Banks have liquidity problem, 1 lakh crores in March, and in April comes another lakh crores. Then the banks don't want to lend, therefore they put back into the Reserve Bank 8.5 lakh crores. Okay, this is the scene that is being played out. But they refuse to understand there's a liquidity problem in the states. This shows and kind of attitude to the federal system itself. Has the Prime Minister, or the Finance Minister in the addresses talked about the finance of the states? No. Maybe the Union Finance Ministers may speak today or tomorrow. The reason I have to go slightly early is that every day after her presentation, we have a press conference giving states response. So I will have to listen to the state.
So can we expect your PIL coming up in the next week or 10 days? If the state is going to the Supreme Court on this GST issue?
Not yet. See, last time we thought about it, then we had not exhausted all the legal possibilities within the GST Council, because the law says in the case of a inter-state or inter-center and state dispute, a dispute mechanism has to be, resolution mechanism has to be set up. Now, so we had to exhaust that possibility. Now I think it is exhausted here.
Thank you, sir. The next question I have got is from Ashim Srivatsav to Vandana. And he says that given the disturbance to remote ecosystems is an inevitable accompaniment of the globally expanding economy, isn't quote unquote advancing COVIDization an inevitable concomitant of advancing globalization? And if there is no such thing as a post-COVID economy, unless there is a retreat from globalization, and then viruses are also merciful.
I think there is a post-normal of the past economy anyway, whether it will be shaped by people and their imagination, or it will be shaped by those who, in the name of being more efficient, expand their footprint. I mean, I'm just looking at, because I have to address the Latin Americans, I was looking at the data. So, why has all the forest of Argentina gone? Why is the Amazon being chopped down? Because of GM soya. Only 10% of soya goes in the food system. 90% goes to biofuel and animal feed. And if you think of the shift that is being intended, about which I talked, farming without farmers, digital agriculture, food without farms, lab food, fake food, put it together, then that means you have to destroy every farm. If you to destroy every farm, then for 7 point whatever billion people we are, you have to invade more forests in order to create those ingredients. They're saying we won't produce food anymore. First they took food, made it a commodity. Now they're taking the commodity and saying, no, we won't sell whole commodities. We'll sell protein to that company. So they are going to the ultimate reductionism. And this is where the extraction happens. This is where the capital accumulation happens. So if we assume that their plans will work, of course there'll never be a post-COVID world. But if their plans work, there will be no world. There'll be a dead planet, decimated people. It is a recipe for ecocide and genocide. And the pathetic thing is, most of these people know they're destroying the planet, and that's why they invested so much in going to Mars and going to Moon. They really live in an imaginary world. They have an imagination that's outside their bodily existence. They're disembodied. They're outside this world. They're outside society. They're masters of such a big illusion. In their world, there'll never be a post-COVID world, but their world means there'll be nothing else. There'll be no other species. Most humans won't exist. The few who exist will be little digital slaves for a little while. And as Mark Zuckerberg has already said, we won't need 99% of humanity with artificial intelligence. So they're working on that assumptions. And that's why we must, overcome all. In comfortable times, when there's a just government and a democratic government, you can be very specialized in your cause. You can be a workers' movement, you can be an environmental movement, you can be a women's movement. But when it's about living and not living, We have to all come together with all of our capacities and diversities, and we don't know which part of it will create the crack in the system.
Thank you. Aruna, Ramu Ramdas has a question, and it is essentially about how you explain the importance of civil disobedience. And now that Vandana has explained what is required in terms of a post-normal in which we actually assert democracy, can I ask you what it really means now to organize, to disagree, to dissent, particularly at a time when elected representatives appear to have become rather immune to the fact that all of us are locked up, and they should be our voices. And in most states, most elected representatives are not stepping out and speaking for the people who put them in power. So how do you channelize this massive human energy and ensure that we can make our government work for us?
So, you know, the reason I wrote a book called Earth's Democracy after the collapse of the Seattle WTO meeting was because it was already becoming extremely clear that, you know, with the British Empire and the East India Company, the rulers had been the money makers and the commercial interests. Then we became independent and we created all kinds of systems. Some places they did a better job, like Kerala, other places they didn't do such a good job. But across the world, we created societies that were able to regulate money power. And what Prabhat talked about, the neoliberal globalization project, was really making money the ruler again. And if you look at the graphs, we came back to the 90-30 inequality. We came back to exactly the same level of poverty. Something else happened. And that is that money started to dictate elections. They put people in power. And there was, you know, you remember Facebook selling data that they had stolen from you without your permission to Cambridge Analytica. And the joke was, US has its first artificial intelligence president. So given that that is what's happening, I think we really need to reclaim and reimagine democracy. Representative democracy works when people are represented. But when corporate interests are represented, and for me the puzzle about the COVID is how come, no matter how different the flavors of government, how come they're identical in their response? There's no debate, maybe Sweden a little bit, maybe New Zealand a little bit, but otherwise there is absolutely no saying, what do we do? And especially since Thomas is still here, you know, we know that this COVID will be around for a little while, but no infection stays as an infection forever. The virus stays, the bacteria stays, you get herd immunity. The most important point is we do need to talk to epidemiologists to say, okay, here's the outermost limit. 6 months, 1 year, let's get a scientific limit from our sovereign epidemiologists. There used to be a Vellore director who's been giving a lot of information. We then need to do the second thing. Say, if this is the outer limit, then all your temporary measures of the dealing with the emergencies must stay temporary. So if you had tracking systems, they should be put aside. They can't be permanent surveillance systems. If you said, okay, kids stay at home, you can't now turn it into a future where no kid ever goes to school. Just because you've decided your factories will be robotics, you now want to create all kinds of difficulties in running industries that has workers and people, including the deregulation of labor laws. So in terms of civil disobedience, I think we need governments like Kerala, we need epidemiologists to give us a thing, okay, let's wait this much time for scientifically, medically reliable portion. And then every temporary measure that is anti-human, anti-people, anti-worker should be put aside. And if it's not put aside, if every one of these surveillance systems, if every one of these social distancing, physical distancing it was supposed to be, you separate yourself by a certain amount of feet, you made it social distancing, and the vocabulary in the tech giants in America is by the end of it, we have to make humans realize that humans are the biohazard. Humans are the biohazard. So you'll have cars without drivers, you'll have everything, you'll be scared of each other. That is where the post-COVID imagination has to recognize what has to be temporary and cannot be made to permanent. And if it is extended in life, we give a call of non-cooperation. Sitting alone, you withdraw. You just don't participate. You know, non-participation doesn't always have to be with large crowds. Your withdrawal and your withdrawal of consent is the beginning of civil disobedience.
Thank you.
Leo,
Arun, yes.
Take leave. Huh?
Yes, sir. So thank you so much. We understand. Please convey our...
Can I just say something to Thomas? Can I just say something, Leo?
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, everyone's been asking you to do things. I just want to say all of this country's concerned citizens are with you to create another future.
I think we have a big round of applause going for you there, sir. Unfortunately, this technology doesn't allow, but I hope this works.
And Aruna and Prabhat, I think we are going to meet tomorrow again. Yeah.
So we'll meet you there.
Yeah.
We'll meet you tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow, yes. Okay. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. So we continue. I mean, Aruna, you have raised this very, very critical concern about the lack of transparency in the thousands of crores that has been invested in the so-called PM CARES fund, and the fact that it has been blocked out even from investigation by the CAG, which otherwise can go into any money across the country of any public agency. Now, this is indicative of the type of system that is being built, where a deeply narcissistic person decides to present himself as the caregiver for the entire country, and then marshals all the resources that come to provide that care, and then we lose control of that money. Now that's a very dangerous situation given what we had before the pandemic came. The type of deceptive politics through which CAA was brought in, the type of deceptive politics through which Article 370 came in, was abrogated. And now we are in this lockdown situation where most of our fundamental freedoms cannot be exercised. So yes, we know, I mean, there are millions who are dissenting. There are millions, probably more, who want to dissent but don't know how to. But how does one give a call for civil disobedience against this order of things? What are the methods that you think we could employ, which could probably be a message that can go out from this forum?
Well, it's a tall order to think of what can be a solution to this country. Actually, we are really many republics together. And the achievement of India has been that it's kept these various republics together through the excellent system of federalism. So the threat to federalism is a threat to India. And I think this has to be recognized politically as well as otherwise by all of us. What Dr. Thomas Issac and to some extent Prabhat also talked about, that this notion of federalism is, I think, vital to a multicultural country like ours. The efforts to break this multicultural layered society into a uniform conditioned response based just on religious identity has been one of the greatest disasters for the country as a whole, and perhaps will fracture very soon. But at the moment, it's a serious crisis. But actually, the secrecy of this regime is a heightened process of almost all governments. I'm saying almost, not all, but almost all governments. Because governments are afraid of transparency in a genetic sense. Because it's been something that is ingrained into both the bureaucratic culture as well as the political culture. We still swear secrecy on the constitution to become a Lok Sabha member. So I think there's something wrong with the psyche. We have carried over the colonial mind state and the structure to modern India. So I think that we have still a lot to fight for, and that's why the right to information is both the most feared and the most hated law. Because I think in terms of the structure itself, they dislike the law. And you know what the Prime Minister had said when he first came to Parliament about restricting the right, and what he has done systematically by amending the rules to make it even more vulnerable to twisting and maligning. But Arogya Setu, which is right round the corner, is another very, very serious thing. There are two things. One is denying transparency to us, and the unfortunate thing is that we have not made enough of a noise about PM CARES being out of scrutiny. It could have been still done, even though we are all boxed in through various means, but very few people have really raised the issue of the lack of transparency of PM CARES. And PM CARE actually also deals with federalism, because God knows how much money has been collected, and God knows how much money can be even spent by Government of India. So how much are the share of the states? Now, but in the case of Arogya Setu, it's the espionage. See, we have had always two sets. One is what the state has allowed us to see, and the other one is what state sees of us. And that in Arogya Setu, I'm still waiting to be completely educated about the horrors of Arogya Setu. But what I hear from reading about it here and there is Arogya Setu is an app that will be mandatory, and it will be downloaded onto everyone who has a smartphone. And the Arogya Setu has capacities to record and to take information from us whether we want to give it or not. I think every citizen in this country must be aware of what he or she is losing, and what he is completely quiet about and allowing the others. And I think this is a crisis of independence and citizenship, the nature of which is enormous. And I think movements will have to take this up as a special call. And I think without that, we can't do anything. But I do think that the biggest scare for the system, for the representative, for the elected representative, was the masses who mobilized on the streets and demanded to be heard, whose parliament was the street, whose policy council was the street, whose area and defining of independence was in how much they could say or not say on the streets. Beginning with Jantar Mantar to now, there's been a huge increasing scale of restrictions on what we can say and how we can say it. So I really think that we'll have to now somehow get mass mobilization into a frame where we can be seen as mass mobilization. Civil disobedience, I do agree with Vandana. Some of us can stay with non-cooperation, but I think for some of the issues, it's got to go into satyagraha. So when you go into satyagraha, you'll have to be seen. I mean, there's no satyagraha you can do in isolation. Even a fast, which Medha has just sat on for the facility of travel for migrant workers, has been in the public domain. A fast has to be in the public domain. So how much of this public domain are we going to get back is both a challenge, and it's an area in which we'll have to think very creatively. And I think we can get it back if we think out of the box. And thinking out of the box will be extremely essential for us now to see how we can reclaim it. Because for the poor, whether they live in slums or they live in villages, there is no physical distancing. The social distancing is a myth. What is social distancing? We do not want social distancing. We want social unity. We want physical distancing. That physical distancing is an impossibility. They live in crowded rooms. They live in crowded areas. There's no space. So all this insistence on physical distancing that they're doing is only the fear of the more privileged people, that they fall victim to an epidemic that's generated by, within quotation marks, the poor and the underprivileged or the marginalized. So I think we'll have to get back to the street, or euphemistically street, but something like a street, which is a public space. And in that, I think that's why I talked about a people's platform. And the people's platform is essential because it gives it the credibility and the support of those progressive political parties which support people's participation, which support the fact that you must hear their voices. It supports the fact that it's not merely the people as a mob, but it's people who vote people to power. So the representative and the representatives, the person who has voted the representative into power, stand side by side and proclaim that they have the same agenda and the same set of objectives, and they want the same set of demands met. It has happened in small doses before COVID, and I think this now needs to get exponentially bigger than it ever was.
Professor Patnaik, there are several questions that have come your way, but I'm trying to just bring them all together because they're all quite interrelated. You spoke at length about the need for an alternative economy. So Asim asks, for instance, if this is a good time to build for the very first time since 1947, the small-scale craft economy to generate non-farm livelihoods everywhere. And which Ashish Kotari says, could it be a time when we actually revisit the economy of permanence of J.C. Kumarappa?
Well, in a sense, this is what I was trying to get at, namely that, that we should not think in terms of industrialization entirely in terms of heavy industry. On the contrary, there's an enormous scope for building up an industrialization from below, in which agricultural demand provides the basis for industry. Let me put it this way. When we talk about export-led industrialization, why do we always think in terms of exports being to other countries? You see, if industry exports to agriculture, then we have an export-led industrialization within the domestic economy itself. But we never think of that as a viable model of export-led industrialization. I believe it's very important now for us to think of it as a model of industrialization, because the world economy in any case is going to be in a shambles for quite some time. And even if it does recover, that model, even when it's successful, doesn't really overcome poverty. So, because it's not sufficiently employment generating, so you have an enormous reserve army of labor that actually grows, if anything, despite the high GDP growth rates. So I would say that really we have to think in terms of industrialization from below, in which agriculture becomes the moving, peasant agriculture, again, I must emphasize, becomes the kind of real driver of this industrialization strategy. And therefore, for that, you have to have local industries, labor-intensive industries, craft production, and so on. But all of which is something which, can then, it can be owned collectively. One can think in terms of alternative models of ownership. It can be owned collectively, cooperatively, it can be owned by the panchayat and so on. But whatever it is, it can be owned locally and doesn't have to invite big capital to come and set it up. So that's the kind of thing which I have been talking about.
Building on that, Aparajita Singh asks, you said in your intervention that the neoliberal global economic paradigm has worked itself out. And so we need to think about how to take forward an economy of care. And she asks if that means, and before her, in fact, Swaminathan also asks, for that paradigm to work, urbanization was critical, because urbanization congregated the consumers in such fantastic scales and intensity that it made the models work. But your model is quite the opposite, actually. And are you suggesting, therefore, when we move away from this, we also must de-urbanize in some forms so that we don't have these mega cities which create the kind of chaos which we now see?
In some sense, this problem of migrant workers is a massive example of de-urbanization. Because after all, if you have crores of people going back to the villages, and it's fortunate that in India we still have a village economy. We still have a place to which these migrants in a crisis can return to. But in many other countries where agriculture has been decimated, in which village life has been decimated, they would have no place to go to. So I think de-urbanization is something which is already happening. As a matter of fact, one of the problems in the coming days would be to find employment for all these people who have gone back to the villages, they're not going to be very easily persuaded to come back to towns, because after all, they left the towns in desperation. And therefore, you have to find employment for them in the villages. And for that, again, it's very important to think of an alternative strategy of development which generates employment in the villages itself or in and around the villages. So in that sense, everything points towards a strategy of development that implies that you have to start from below.
Thank you. I must say that, Professor, that I just saw that Admiral Ramdas, Lalita and Admiral Ramdas have commented that suppose large numbers of us volunteer civil society groups were to walk, march with those on the roads heading home, that probably can also be seen as mass civil disobedience. It's probably also a sign of great solidarity with the struggles that migrant workers are going through. I'm just going to cycle back to the questions, and there is one from Unni Krishnan, which says where laws are violated and disrespected, it is also necessary to re-emphasize values and principles. The draconian measures that are prevalent today are against human rights. It is equally against human values and universal principles, such as compassion and human solidarity. So the point here is that how does one actually work these type of values into systems of governance which are immune to such values? And I don't know who it is directed at, but anyone feels comfortable answering it.
Can I just say, Leo,
Yeah.
Precisely in these times of crisis and collapse, and a total separation between the governed and those who govern, that resilience comes from within humanity. Yeah, if the people who were leaving the cities, the urbanization that Prabhat has talked about, if they were still getting food, it wasn't because the system had organized food. It was because there was compassion and people were mobilized. And I think that solidarity as the foundation, as the social foundation to build the new economies, it won't come top down, and it will not be something that's ever happened before, because we have never had to be so creative, to create so much work for so many hands. One part of it for sure is the regeneration of the earth. That was what the Green New Deal was about, soil conservation, and what Roosevelt had created was a conservation corps. And Manrega should become a conservation corps. Second, of course, agriculture, away from fossil fuels and chemicals to create work. And then, whether you call it craft economy or rural industrialization or the economy of permanence, and now we have to be far more creative. We won't be able to do it unless we generate the living resources. We'll have to create biodiversity economies rather than fossil economies. And to me, the worst part of the fossil economy was it fossilized our minds and it fossilized our hearts. This crisis is a moment to allow both creativity and compassion to grow in each of us.
There's a kind of a follow-up question which has come quickly from Bhargavi on this. And she asks if, currently the whole concentration of government is on building big infrastructure, but the farming sector, the social sector has been largely relegated to what is called the corporate social responsibility driven developmental agenda, in which the corporate sectors are really instituting interventions of corporatization of those critical aspects of governance. Now, how do you see the role of, let's say, large corporations shoving money into massive funding agencies, and how does that play out in the farming sector in these times? How will it play out in terms of the type of focus on nutrition and food security that was so critical to building a welfare state, but today it has become a state which can probably give welfare some of the time, and perhaps through the corporate sector?
So, over these 35 decades, having learned what I can about farming, Good farming needs good seed, it needs soil that you make more fertile, and it needs your mind and you. That's it. And all of this external input, whether it be the external input of chemicals or the external input of big money or the CSR responsibility, I think it is worthy of a satyagraha for all the rural communities where we work. We must do a satyagraha against this, because the next stage of agriculture, as I said, will be digitalization, get rid of the farmers, mine their mind, get their knowledge, then sell back to them as big data, but it will be financialization. BlackRock, who's driving much of this new model of agriculture in India through the BNP Paribas and all, BlackRock has increased its asset management in a month, 1 month of the COVID crisis, from 7 trillion to 23 trillion. Now they're going to do everything where money can be made for their asset holders. They're not going to do something that allows the soil to become more fertile. They won't do anything to allow more biodiversity to grow, to more pollinator. They won't want to do something where people have food. So if you notice, and we worked on this, the zero budget model is commodity production for the international supply chains. And while our agriculture was in crisis, this experiment was being done. A flight took vegetables to England, and we were so proud that we are sending food out to England. So we are going to become export-oriented commodity agriculture. Less and less people, unless we do a satyagraha and say, no, this land, the farmers and the migrant workers who've returned, together, not only can we meet all our food and nutrition needs, we can create the work and deal with the pandemic of unemployment, and we can produce all of the food we need and produce healthy food. And this new economy of care, on the broader sense of economy of care for the earth, economy of care for community, economy of care for our health, that economy of care is what we have to reimagine. And for this, we will all have to bring our best together. But wherever there's a civil society activist, please tell your communities, do not get involved in corporate money. Do not get involved in debt. They're talking in Uttaranchal about drones mapping the land to give you loans to then grab the land. So becoming free of debt, becoming free of dependence will be the way we will be able to present the ecological infrastructure for the new.
Thank you. Here's a question for Aruna. Aruna, you spoke at length about the need for not just building decentralized systems, but ensuring that they are inclusive in every possible way and not exclusive, as you have described in your intervention, where villagers are keeping Muslims, for instance, out. So the question is from Soma, who says, can we build a strategy for an inclusive, it shouldn't be just decentralized, but localized, but most especially a gender inclusive and just, but networked farmer-centric process of community institutions. And she asks, what role should panchayats play in such a possibility?
Well, it's a question that Soma, I'm sure, can answer as well as I do. But the point is that in a dysfunctioning panchayat, most of our panchayat systems just don't function. And the vested interest of the panchayat hierarchy in divisiveness and in dividing us to rule is now raised to the power of n, because we can't talk politics without talking caste. We can't talk politics without talking religion. We can't talk politics without talking about gender and the million divides that we have. I think the first thing, therefore, in the critical point now, and that's what COVID has given us, is that pushing them all into the same small space of hunger and poverty, again facing dire unemployment, we get a small space to start again where we go and talk about these issues that they feel are immediate. At that point, we get people together, and from there we must have the agenda to make sure that we address these issues, which as movements we have not addressed before in quite the same way that we now feel inclined to do, we did just before COVID came, and we will now continue to do, where we will talk about issues of communal divide, where we will talk about all these issues as much upfront as we do about economic issues. And I think in that now I won't call it a strategy. Our intention should be to win the trust of people and to exhibit the principles that we believe in, which is fairness, which is constitutional values, which is justice, which is equality, and make sure that they understand the value of these principles in the Constitution, which has so far led them to a point where they can at least stand on the street and make a demand. And that any law that comes to restrict this, whatever form it may come in, is harmful to them. I think this realization, we used to have a slogan which we shouted at the beginning of Narega, when we started the Narega campaign, in which we said, Trishul nahi, talwar nahi, kaam ka adhikar chahiye. Because at that time, Gujarat was happening. So, Trishul nahi, talwar nahi, kaam ka adhikar chahiye, har haath ko kaam do, kaam ka pura daam do. So, we have to combine the economic and social issues together, make them understand that divided they will fall, divided they will lose, together they will win. All the stuff, all the issues on which they've been struggling for so long will become realizable only when they do that. And I wanted to say a little bit about the humanity thing. I feel that the system in the last 6 years has corroded systematically into the humanity that we all took for granted in India's rural society. There was a compassion in terms of at least feeding people, or at least looking after the poor and the unwell. I think today, these trenches that have been dug around the villages and asking the identity of people, we have really gone back thousands of years into a society which was really worse than, I don't even know what word to use. So everything was only on the basis of the narrowest of identities and the narrowest of immediate benefits. I think we'll have to go back in one sense to start talking about democratic values.
Okay, I think we have lost Aruna there. We lost you for a bit. Yeah, I hope your internet comes back. Professor Patnaik, we must wind up soon, but this probably would be the last question, I guess. Professor Patnaik, there is a question from Ashok Srimalli that the Labour Ministry estimates around 31,000 crores is lying from the Building and Other Construction Workers Welfare Board's fund. Another estimate which Seema I saw is on this, she wrote in the IDR that this could be as much as 70,000 crores. Now, how do you see, the Prime Minister spoke a couple of days ago, this whole speech, he said we have to become self-reliant. But this is money of the labor, which is not coming back to them in their worst times. And here is a speech that is being made, as Sahil says, towards self-reliance by the Prime Minister. Now, how does this really add up? What kind of self-reliance is it when there is no care? When there is no giving back what belongs to the labor? How do we relate with this type of pitch that has now been made, given also the kind of enormous difficulty the finance minister has in explaining it to the public? Because if we can see the comments that have come the last 2 days, the public is quite smart and knows exactly that they're not really getting much. So what do we make of this 20 lakh crore claim?
You know, this 20 lakh crore is something which really means nothing. Because this is, you're asking banks to give loans and things of that kind. The actual amount of fiscal support for this package is really quite trivial. It's actually an eyewash. And we have to be very careful that, you know, while it sounds very impressive, it really means nothing. It's fine for the Prime Minister to keep talking about self-reliance. I think the Swadeshi Jagran Manch talks about self-reliance and so on. But self-reliance has certain preconditions. Self-reliance, for instance, would mean that you produce goods inside the country instead of importing them, even if the imports are cheaper, because you generate employment domestically and you don't let your wages go down in order to compete against cheaper imports. Now, this is something which the Prime Minister has not talked about, because all this self-reliance must mean a degree of delinking from economic liberalization. You cannot have complete freedom for goods to be imported and exported with very small tariff rates, and likewise complete freedom for finance, including capital, to go across borders and talk about self-reliance, because that kind of a regime of free commodity and capital flows imposes a certain strategy upon you, which is the opposite of self-reliance, which actually produces deindustrialization, which means cheaper imports outcompete your domestic producers, which is what has been happening in the last several decades. So he can talk about self-reliance until the cows come home. But on the other hand, unless one is talking about setting up a regime which is serious, then one has to talk in terms of setting up a regime in which there is that kind of a protection that is given to domestic industry. By particularly domestic industry, I mean domestic small-scale enterprises, domestic petty enterprises, petty production, and so on. There was a question to me about the Tobin tax I found. Can I just take it up? Can I just take up the question about the
Please,
Tobin?
please, sir.
Because that's a technical question which I want to clarify. You see, the Tobin tax is quite irrelevant in opposite to our purposes, because when James Tobin suggested that tax, he was talking about capital that's of finance that is moving around at a dizzying pace across borders, and therefore his idea was that you put even a tiny bit of tax and that would be enough to prevent finance from moving around so rapidly. So the whole Tobin tax was to prevent the speed of financial movements from becoming too rapid. But our problem at this moment, for instance, is not that the speed of movement is rapid, but that finance is simply flowing out of the country. Okay, so Tobin tax is not really the correct tax for this kind of a situation, for which you'll have to have some kind of control on capital.
Thank you. Thanks for that. May I ask any final thoughts? For instance, Vandana, there's a question about why is, this is from Arshna, why is the effectiveness possibly not of Ayurvedic systems not being tested against corona? Is there a mental block, or is there a big pharma pressure not to allow such possibilities? And while you respond to that, can you also give a final comment, maybe in a minute or so, so we can wrap up in the next 5 minutes? I request all three of you, any final words?
So it's not the case that Ayurveda is not being worked on. I'm getting requests from all over the world who are using Ayurveda to cure, because at the end of the day, any infection affects a body. If the body has immunity and it has the potential to be able to be resilient to that infection, it doesn't get the impacts of the infection. No, it doesn't have serious implications. So I have heard the WHO spokesman talk about not talking about such things. So Big Pharma, which totally controls WHO now, has basically said, A, no talk about immunity. 2, no talk about other therapies beyond vaccines. So the two things being pushed on us, and that to me is the dictatorship. The dictatorship is, you'll all be locked down till Mr. Gates has a vaccine, untested, unverified, but that he'll allow you to go out. And second, till he's got his surveillance system in place. And the two are actually connected. So what are my parting words? My parting words is, when we had to fight for freedom, there was just one problem at that time. One empire of cotton. Of course, taking Lagan and pushing us to hunger and starvation. But today, every dimension of our life is being locked in. And every sovereign state, no matter what the color of the elected leader, they are all marching to the tunes of 4 or 5 billionaires who own the asset funds, who own the companies, including Big Pharma, Big Ag, Poison Cartel. It's one lump of greed. we have to find creative ways to bring their power down, both by not falling into their trap of their imagination, creating other imaginations, and where necessary, engaging in satyagraha and civil disobedience. I think we give them another 6 months, and after that, the only option will be civil disobedience and satyagraha.
Thank you. Aruna?
I want to say that actually now only one small positive thing on which we can build absolutely as much as we can, and that is this dream of neoliberal wealth, of the fact that you can amass wealth and riches is somehow bust. People are talking about how they'll have to grow their food again, how to get back to agriculture, how to make themselves self-sufficient, not self-reliant, but self-sufficient at least where food, health and other things are concerned. There are also cries for public health, demand for public health. There are all kinds of old issues coming up, and I think we must absolutely build on this now. I mean, there is no future for that. We must absolutely build on it now, start building the discourse and start pushing it. Thank you.
Professor Patnaik?
Well, you know, for some time now, one has been worried about the tendency towards communal fascism, which of course has been there and even now. To that, I now find that there is this complete lack of concern about migrant workers, about the workers generally, and so on. The question which arises in my mind is, are these two related? And I believe that they are. They are really two sides of the same coin, of a kind of homophobia which currently characterizes governments not only in our country but in large numbers or several third world countries. Against this we have to fight, but that fight, I agree with Aruna that that it's not an easy fight, because communalization has gone pretty deep even among the ordinary people. But that fight would have to be to unite the people around a program of building a welfare state, and building democracy and building a welfare state are just two sides of the same coin. We cannot have a democracy without having a welfare state, and to mobilize people around that demand is really the need of the hour. We talked about civil disobedience. Civil disobedience is a means towards an end, but the end has to be to strengthen democracy in the country by building a welfare state.
Thank you so much. On this note, I draw to a conclusion this excellent series of interventions and conversations that we have had on really good questions that have come, and wonderful participation from so many people. We reached the maximum that this forum allows. So the room was full, in a sense, and we had people from across the world. So I want to end by thanking the Center for Financial Accountability for taking initiative in organizing this webinar. Now we can reimagine the future, and now actually particularly we can bring an economy to fore, which is a people's economy and not the corporate or money for money's sake. Many groups collaborated: All India Union of Forest Working People, DASAM, Delhi Forum, Environment Support Group, Financial Accountability Network, Focus on the Global South, Indian Social Action Forum, Institute for Democracy and Sustainability, Mahalir, Mausam, Mazdoor, of course, Kisan, Shakti Sangathan, NAPN, Confederation of National Confederation of Officers Association, People's First, People's Resource Center, Pakistan India People's Forum for Peace and Democracy, and the Research Collective. Of course, there are many groups that have circulated and supported and in solidarity also participated in this program. In particular, individuals who worked to build this. I thank Priya for really working day and night, and Joe and Vijayan and Benny and Bhargavi and the rest of the Maju and the rest of the CFA team. At ESG, Sana, Bhargavi, Shrestha and Vindhya have been blogging it. I do request you to go and look it up and circulate it, because our means of communication are quite heavily restricted now, and so unfortunately we may have to rely on such very inconvenient ways to communicate for at least a little time. So please go visit this Twitter pages and try and spread the word around. The next session will be on Tuesday, and those who have signed up will get a prompt about how to join that forum. And we also request you to kindly share and join in this dialogue so that we can help construct a worldview which is very different from what we are now enduring. We must also add that there will be specific statements coming out, say for instance from today, and every time we have a meeting like this, the next one is next Tuesday, we will be coming out with a statement sectorally. There are different sectors, and I invite you to visit the Center for Financial Accountability website, which is senfa.org, where much of the details have already been shared. Thank you again, and thank you particularly to Professor Prabhat Patnaik, Aruna Roy, and Dr. Vandana Shiva for making time in participating in this webinar. And certainly thanks to Dr. Thomas Issac for having made time from what certainly must be a very, very difficult period in governance. So thank you all. Thanks for joining, and welcome again to the next webinar on Tuesday.
Thank you, Leo.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Much.